Hi everyone, I'm Jill Hindley Lawrence and welcome to Our Town. Today we're talking about this new initiative that's coming across the country called the Late Start Initiative. And I've got two great guests with me here today. I've got Jim Adams, Superintendent of Schools at Ashland in Ashland, Massachusetts. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. And I've got Julie Kinney, who's a King Philip parent and someone who has done some research on the Late Start Initiative for high school and middle schools. So let's jump right into it. So Jim, if you could take it over. So this is basically an idea that adolescents need more sleep than they're getting to be healthy, to learn better. So it's the idea that schools should begin, instead of getting up 5, 6 a.m., arriving at school by some high school 7:30 a.m. This is shifting everything later.
Right.
So that's what the Late Start Initiative or school. What's the
Start School Later,
which is the an organization. So we'll get to that. But Jim, if you jump right in and tell us what it is and how it works.
So from our perspective, I was a high school teacher as well as a high school principal and now superintendent. And when we started getting our data from our Metro West Adolescent Health Survey, what we noticed was the data showed our students were really stressed, a lot of anxiety, getting very little sleep, less than 6 hours of sleep on average at the high school level, and in even less than 8 hours at the middle school level. And starting around 2012, that conversation within our high school site council was, what can we do? What are some things that we can do as a district to help alleviate some of the anxiety and stress and make our students healthier?
Yeah.
And that's really the perspective we took. Was it's about health and well-being of our students.
Right.
The later initiative really began thinking that academics, discipline, attendance, tardiness, all of those were factors that could be mitigated by starting later with adolescents. We didn't take that perspective in Ashland. We really solely focused on our health and well-being.
Health. Okay, so the learning.
It's a health initiative.
Okay, so and the other things were sort of secondary.
Yeah.
Became secondary.
Yeah,
Okay.
and Julie and I have had this conversation before. The medical professionals agree 100% that our students need to be sleeping more.
Oh my goodness,
and
they do.
Adolescents in particular. And that drove us. That drove our community to look at the research and the data. And I wouldn't say we were one of the first. I think in the last couple of years we've sort of peaked in a lot of districts around us in Burlington, Weston, Wayland, Melrose. There are a number of districts that have moved their start times, understanding that it's a health concern.
Right, move them for the older set, the middle school, high school.
Middle and high.
When I did go through your slideshow, Julie, one of the things that really struck me was that the list that you had of organizations, basically medical organizations, that have said that it's kind of a straightforward school for adolescents. School should not start before 8:30,
right.
And it's the AMA, American Medical Association, the pediatrics.
American Academy of Pediatrics.
Yeah.
I mean, the list goes on.
It's two slides.
And that wasn't a complete list.
The American Psychological Association, all these different groups
and
that
the
have
Massachusetts Association of School Committees, is that the correct
MASC.
term?
Okay, yeah. So you and Ashland, you focused to kind of get this going on the health of the student, which, and then obviously you've been at it about a year and change, and have you seen improvement then in like some of the things you said, like tardiness to school or the discipline things or the I don't know, the overall running.
So it's an interesting question, and one that we get often is, hey, Jim, are you going to do a survey of the students in the community to see how start times are going?
Yeah.
And I've been very blunt. I said, at this point, the answer is no, right? I think there's a lot of anecdotal data in having conversations with families and students, but in order for the change to really cement itself within our community and our organization is to give it a couple years.
Right.
We're in the process of doing the Metro West Adolescent Health Survey now.
Okay.
So we took it in the fall.
Right.
So we'll have that data only after a year of start time change.
Right.
have we seen in year 2, and I recently have spoken with my principal and assistant principal at the high school, we've definitely seen a decrease in discipline. We've seen a decrease in tardiness. We're not really focused on the academic achievement of students in that sense. I think we're a high achieving district to begin with. It's sort of, I'm focused on where are we with the health and well-being of our kids, and we won't know that for a year or 2.
Right, of course.
So that's sort
hard
of,
to
that's
measure.
the struggle,
It's hard
right?
to measure that.
The measure
Yeah,
piece
right.
is really challenging.
And I wonder, and that was one of my questions I was
Yeah.
going to ask later, but I'll ask it now. Well, some of the info, I mean, we've kind of discussed the Massachusetts cities and towns, but this is a nationwide initiative. We were just saying before the show that the whole Minneapolis, St. Paul, Seattle, are there other big cities that you know of?
Alexandria, Virginia was
that's
one of the
a-
first
I'm sure it's a
ones.
huge
They were a
district, yeah.
huge district, and they switched, and
Right.
And I think they're 9, right? 9
yeah,
a.m.
yeah,
9
they're
9
Yeah,
a.m.
they
start.
really pushed it.
Yeah, so that's a good clarification point,
Yeah.
is that, school for many high schools traditionally, at middle school, high school, school starts between 7 and say 7:45.
Yeah.
Right, and
7:50.
traditionally, it kind of really only goes back to around the 70s. I think it started to change, and it was mainly financial and busing that
Right.
drove those.
Busing, okay.
Right.
Because the busing probably way back, kids were walking,
it was
right,
more
way back. It
community,
was the
neighborhood
walking to school,
schools.
yeah. So I wonder how Seattle, or I was saying, when I was in grad school, that's when, and I was studying education, that's when Minneapolis, St. Paul was switching, and that was 17, 18 years ago. Right. I wonder how they can measure if there's improved academic outcomes.
There are, and I think that, again, I think it goes back to the district. So I think about Ashland, and we have a rotating schedule of our students.
Right.
So
That's
there's no consistency. So when you talk about that first period class, right? It's
Always different.
it's
Yeah.
always different.
Right, which
But-
is great, actually.
And I agree.
Yeah.
But what we do know is that if you, again, anecdotally, you talk to teachers, kids are more awake. Kids are more alert. They're ready to perform an hour later.
An hour, and you're starting in Ashland at
We start now at 8:20.
8:20?
We were,
Oh, wow.
so we were at 7:30, but
Okay.
the real rub is students were dropped off at 6:55 from the busing.
Goodness.
So they're getting there.
Dropped off at
Yeah.
6:55. Oh my goodness.
They're getting there, and they were an hour now. I mean, if you do the math now, it'd be an hour and 25 minutes before they would have to perform now. So
Yes.
so
That's 90
it's-
minutes of sleep.
yeah. So we pick up an hour of sleep.
Right.
It doesn't seem like a lot, but that's 5 hours in a week.
yeah.
Multiply that by the 180 days,
Oh.
and you're talking 900 hours of additional.
Right. So, and that segues us right in to your sort of, your expertise in that you've done some reading and research about the effects of sleep on our health, and whether it's immune system, cognitive. So if you have a few points you want to share.
Yeah, so I read the book Why We Sleep about a year ago, and that's what really got me excited about this topic. And so it's just sleep affects everything. I mean, if the lack of sleep detrimentally affects our immune systems. So depending on your genetic disposition,
Right.
that could affect anything,
Long term.
long term, right? So, diabetes, cancer, mental function, everything.
Right.
And, and viruses, your immune system is what fights those viruses. So little things like getting sick, the cold,
the flus, the cold, yeah.
it really makes a difference. And in that book, I had read that, I think they looked at people who would get 8 hours of sleep versus people who had 5 hours of sleep, and they actually put a cold virus in the noses of
they
these
did.
participants in the study.
Okay.
And it was amazing. The people with 5 hours of sleep had much higher rates of illness than the people with 8 hours
Yeah.
of sleep.
And we're all, adults and parents and professionals. That's something that seems instinctive, because you just know how you feel when you have
Right.
slept. So I guess what I think is interesting about the sleep part, the health part, is that it's not, I think as parents we're thinking short term for our kids, like right now, right? But you've got that perspective from this book, and is the long term, the cancer and and what are we what are we modeling or teaching our kids if we're saying that, yes, you can go to bed at 11 and you have to be at school by 7:15? Like, that's ridiculous. You know, they are growing.
Well, that's something we actually haven't talked about. This is the science piece, right? So when kids hit about ages 11 to 13 or so, this scientific research shows that their circadian rhythms kind of jump ahead 2 hours. So whereas maybe they were going to sleep at 9 o'clock at night, now they're really not ready for sleep until 11, usually at the minimum, right? So there's like this owl or a lark, right? So the owls may be much later. Maybe they're not ready for sleep until 1 a.m. And that's just kind of your own, your biological disposition. So that's scientifically proven. So that's the issue, right? It's not, you can't say get to bed at 9:30. You've got to get to sleep at 9:30. They can't.
And I think I said to you, I'm a night person and not a morning person, just naturally.
Right.
I have energy at 9 and 10.
Right.
I mean, depends. Not when I had babies at home. But so I get that. Like, I can feel that they can feel that way, and I see it where we kind of have to sometimes my kids are good about going to bed for the most part, but they're not. And when they get into bed, I think that's something that would be an argument. Well, if they would just get into bed, they'd probably, if they're tired enough, they'd fall asleep. But that's a question. You're saying maybe not, because their circadian rhythms change when they start going through puberty.
Yeah. Most likely not. And that's where this movement comes from. So I was just getting ready for this. I was listening to the TED Talk by Wendy Troxel, who's a sleep researcher from University of Pittsburgh, I think. And it's a wonderful TED Talk, and she says exactly that. They are just not ready until 11 a.m. usually. 11 p.m. Sorry.
Yeah, 11 p.m. And then they're obviously if they're getting to school at 7 or 7:30. So you switched to 8:20, and then I know Weston. I just talked to a couple of different people from Weston just over the weekend. 8:45 is now their start, and this is brand new for them, for the Weston schools. This is only the first 3 months. I just think it's so interesting that. That whether you're measuring the learning or not, it's just that your kids, I bet, are feeling, well, you'll know when they do the survey. Right. Yeah, tell us a little bit more about that, because I know our kids take that too, right? Metro West, or we take something similar.
There are a number that exist. So,
yeah.
Because I think KP's just out of that Metro West region.
Right, we might be.
So it tests a lot of things. The survey is designed, initially it was looking at drug, alcohol, tobacco, stress levels. We've shifted to focus more on, stress, anxiety. And again, I want to be clear when people are watching, some stress is good, right? So let's not think all stress is bad.
Right.
Some stress is good. You have a lot of opportunities to find strategies to deal with stress. That's a good thing. But there's also anxiety and stress and school phobia that does exist too. And I was mentioning to Julie, for us, we noticed that we had over 20 hospitalizations of students, high school students, in 1 year. And this was 6-7 years ago.
Wow.
And because of that, we were thinking, what can we do to mitigate some of the stress of school? And having conversations with those students, it was the amount of homework, it was the lack of sleep, it was the pressure to be successful.
College, I'm sure.
College, so we're a community that's 91-92% going on to college, and that's stressful enough, getting into the right college, and the pressures we put on as parents with our own children sort of led us down that path of looking at the start time and moving away from doing things the old way, because that's how we've always done it.
That's how we've done it. And it's too hard to change. That's what I think is interesting.
Right.
That sort of idea, well, how can we do it? How do you do the buses? How do you do the sports?
Yeah, right.
Well, you know what? I love the point that you made when we first chatted about this, which is apparently Jim's point, that really when you weigh out learning, just even not taking academics and GPAs and grades and college admissions, but learning and general health, and you weigh that against what time a sports game is going to start, and the smaller details. It really isn't. It's not an even comparison. Obviously, one of them is much more important.
Right. You mentioned homework and a lot of other pressures, right? So did your task force tackle all of those things? Was it as a part of the, trying to lower stress, so not just starting school later, but also?
Actually, we didn't. We're actually very focused within the start time piece and the research behind the start time. So we made it clear that the homework discussion has to occur outside of the start times, and that still is a concern. But I think what we're finding is that there's this perception versus reality in terms of the homework load, and every student is going to be challenged a little bit differently, right? So one student may be taking an hour, but it may take another student 20 minutes to complete it. So their stress levels are very different with that homework. The thing we want to be very cautious with is that this is one component, right? I mean, as parents, we've got to think about screen time, electronics at night, an hour before you go to bed. Make sure they're off, right? Those are things that we know our brain has to start shutting down naturally as well.
Right.
But yet, if you've got the phone, and I've got two middle schoolers, and their cell phones are downstairs at night. They don't have them. They're not in their room.
Right.
And it's really important that as that conversation occurred within our community, they're saying you're trying to fix it all with one. We're not. This is just one component.
You're admitting that you're not.
No, heck no. This is just one component.
Yes.
The homework conversation's another.
It is. The screen time technology.
The screen time, the overscheduling. I've been a big, naysayer. I don't know, naysayer's not the right word, but I struggle currently with parents, and admittedly being one, of overscheduling our kids. And someone said to me, you're really overscheduled when you walk home at the end of the day as a parent or drive home, and you're exhausted because of all of the carpooling and things that you've done. Imagine how that child feels.
Right.
And yet they're still growing and developing as an individual.
Right. They're kids. They're children.
Right. Their bodies and their mind, and yet here we are thinking, I'm stressed out.
Right. That is such a great point, because I sometimes feel like I have to gear up for like 3 o'clock because I'm going until 9, right? And so I am like, okay, my day at 3, and again, imagine how they feel, because that's supposed to be their downtime, starting at 3 o'clock. Right. So that's an excellent point. Something just popped in my head, but it might be gone. Oh, I think it was that with Ashland, I like how you're saying that this is just one component, and then there's all these others, and you're not trying to solve everything, because there's all the pressures. There's the college stuff, college pressure. There's the homework. There's the technology. There's all of that. But you guys looked at it like, let's see what we can do as a district to help, because you can't go up in everyone's house and take their phones out of the bedrooms, right? So you can.
To that point, I started when I was a principal. Now it's district-wide. We started something what I call Family Reconnect Weekends.
Okay. So
it's at least 3 times a year, sometimes 4, where on a Friday. We shut down the school district, basically.
Oh, wow.
There are no activities. There are no athletic practices. There are no.
Oh my goodness.
There's no drama. There's no music events. So I'll use an example of when we have Martin Luther King weekend, for instance. We know we have that Monday off. Yeah. So what I've tried to do is schedule the Friday to be a professional development day.
Oh, perfect.
So now I tell families, Friday through Monday. You're free. It's your family time.
It's yours, yeah.
So I know you have a basketball game on a Tuesday, and it'd be, some would think it's unfair that they don't get a chance to practice over the weekend because the other schools are. And we made a concerted effort to say, no, this is still about connections. It's still about having a chance to breathe.
Downtime.
And then if you want to practice at 2 o'clock on a Monday, now we've had Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and most of Monday for families. To really relax, and that's part of it, right? It's sort of, we're trying to figure out ways to assist with the start times as well.
So you're pulling back a little bit as you were principal and now as superintendent on the coaches and saying, hey,
coaches and teachers, because there are no projects, there are no assessment.
There's no projects. So you pull back a little.
Oh yeah. So the only step that we've got to be careful with is advanced placement, right?
Of course.
That's a college level course, and some of those students we'll have work because that's just typical of, and so same with vacation weeks and making sure that there are no assessments when we come back.
That's
that
good.
the families can
have that vacation.
Yeah.
I love it. And you call the weekends the
Family Reconnect weekends.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah.
It's funny, just mentioning assessments, I was thinking about that in the book. He talks about that also. So he actually wrote an op-ed in the Harvard Crimson when he was at Harvard. Matthew Walker.
Oh, Matthew Walker.
So the author.
Right.
So he talked about, that's something that we might have to look at doing differently, assessing, because oftentimes testing is midterm and final.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you have to cram because
Right.
but if assessments are kind of done throughout or differently, I'm not a professional academic, but that might be a part of the equation at some point as well,
Spreading it
so
out.
that kids aren't staying up all night, because the studies are really interesting about that too, what happens in terms of the learning.
Oh yeah, you think
So-
about college,
Yeah.
right? That was
Something-
my plan.
Something that
No, it's right, and there's a mindset, right? I mean, I'm a big Carolyn Dweck fan and growth mindset, and it's a mindset that we have as educators. And I was a high school teacher. Is that we're trying to prepare our kids for college, therefore they've got to be ready to take this 2-hour exam. I'm thinking, no, not really. They don't need to be focused on that at 15, 16 years
Right.
old.
They don't have to mimic college
right.
at
So
high
let's,
school. Yeah.
Julie, what you're talking about is formative assessment. So really assessing on a regular basis that someone knows the material.
Right.
That last piece, that summative, that it's nice to be able to learn how to take a 2-hour exam, but where are you going to do that in real life afterwards? Maybe when you get your law.
Yeah, if
Maybe
you're
when you
going
sit for the
to-
CPA exam like I
GMATs
did.
and-
But that's it, right?
Yeah.
Right.
But
That's true.
I don't do it
doesn't
professionally
apply to
anymore.
everyone. I know,
Interesting.
sitting to focus that hard
Right.
for 2 hours
And-
on testing.
Right.
Or,
What's really interesting is learning happens over the course of many nights. So what's happening is they're missing critical REM sleep in the morning by getting up, right? So, and what happens during that time is it's moving from short-term memory
Right.
to long-term memory.
Oh, that's right.
And
that's
so,
how it works. Yeah.
we're kind of hurting that
We're
process
skipping.
by missing
kind of-
that.
yeah.
And it's also an important time for creativity,
Yeah.
mental wellness, is it emotional control, I think it is.
Oh,
so
right.
and one thing we didn't talk about is at this age they really need a minimum of 8.5 hours of sleep. 8.5 to 9.5.
And
I
that's
think
probably for the older adolescent, even maybe 14, 15, 16. I would think that 11, 12, 13 in middle school need 9 or 10 hours, right?
Yeah. No, you're right, and I think even pushing, the conversation within communities is that even though it's only an hour difference, is it really going to make a difference, right? I mean, they're still not going to get 9,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Now they're moving, but you know what?
It adds.
Is 6 better than 5? Is 7 better than 6? The closer we get, I mean, when we started the process, my school committee wanted to start at 9 o'clock for high school.
Oh, wow.
And I had to rein them in.
You did.
Yeah,
Oh, so
to
they
say,
really, wow, they were on
yeah.
board.
Oh,
huh?
no, they
Yeah.
were completely on
Let's
board.
do 9
It
o'clock.
was,
Okay.
we've got to be thoughtful of families,
Yes,
the
working
parents, the
parents,
community,
yeah.
athletic. We had to take all of
All
that
that
into
in,
consideration. And I think you have to within a community. You can't just jump in and say, we're starting at 8:45 like Weston or 9. It has to work for your own community.
Right.
And you do the best you can
Yes.
to adjust it
To adjust
as much
it
as
and
you
give
can.
them
right?
more
So,
minutes of sleep.
Yeah, we always talked about having the greatest amount of impact
Right.
with the least amount
Amount
of negative impact.
Yes, right. Which brings you to the sort of which I thought just to touch on that, the pros and cons. I mean, I'm sure you had your own mental pros and cons list. I'm sure every school committee member and that's kind of where maybe KP, King Philip is at, where we've got to, as parents, as the educators, the school committee, that have to look at like, how is it going to look?
Right.
But you said, I love how you said that. Does 1 hour make a difference? Does 7 better than 6? Does 8 hours of sleep better than 7? And from what I've seen, just briefly, yes, the medical community says absolutely, especially for teenagers. I mean, it probably is important for us, but for teenagers, I mean, they say that, is it true from what you've read that there's actual, like at the cellular level, they are growing while they're sleeping, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's an important
I think
time.
it was a year or
of
two
growing.
ago that made the mainstream media, that was critical growth time
Growing.
between 5:30 and 8:30
Yeah,
a.m.
right. Yeah, that's it. That's the sweet spot of sleeping time.
Yes. That's when I like to be sleeping.
And that's when we were asking our kids to get up.
Right.
Right?
Like ripping them out of sleep. I mean, I got
6 o'clock, catch the bus.
So are there any other, before we wrap, Julie, are there any other benefits that you want to touch on? Because I feel like we did a good job with the, like, sort of just giving a general perspective.
Yeah, I brought this list because I really liked it. I thought it wrapped things up pretty succinctly, and it was opportunities or improved academic outcomes, positive health, wellness, and safety benefits, continue, so I think this was actually from Lexington's website.
Oh, Lexington's another one.
yeah.
Then. We didn't mention them. Okay.
And they haven't made the switch yet, but they're
Oh, they
working toward it
haven't.
for
They're
the
still working
coming
towards it, yeah.
academic year. But better capacity to retain, retrieve, and utilize knowledge and information, less binge sleeping on the weekends, decline of tardiness and sick days, improved metabolic functioning. That affects everything,
Right.
metabolic
Metabolic
and
is,
functioning.
right.
Increased levels of concentration and alertness, quicker reaction times, less fatigue, reduced irritability and mood swings, lower likelihood of depression, fewer instances of risk-taking behavior. And in the video I was listening to, the TED Talk I was listening to today, she talked about suicide rates going down
Oh, wow.
significantly.
We'll make sure we'll put up not only this info, but the other, a couple of the other things, like the Start School Later website and that, so that parents can look at that
Great.
and kind of make their own, like read and learn and make their own, form their own opinion. So, all right, any last words before we finish up?
No,
We'll give Jim the last word.
Yeah, no, I mean, from my perspective, I think each community, and I've been around the state quite a bit to have this conversation with communities who are thinking of starting school later.
You're a flag bearer now.
Well, I don't know about that,
Yeah.
but I think each community has to look at it themselves and try to figure out. You can easily mitigate the hurdles, right? You can reduce those hurdles. You can look at busing and athletics, and we didn't get into any of those things that communities struggle with, but they can be mitigated.
They can be.
And it just takes effort,
and
and
it's
it takes a
change.
team, but it takes a willingness to say this is a problem, right? This is a health concern for our kids. And change is difficult. We all struggle with it. But in the end, I hope what we want as educators and as parents is to put our kids in the best position to be successful in life.
Right.
And if they're healthier and happier, they're going to be more functional. They're going to perform better academically. They're just going to be
Better humans.
Better
Yeah.
humans. And Lord knows we need that right now.
Yeah, yes, we do.
So yeah.
All right, well, that was great. I like that we just were able to kind of look at the big picture here, and then, maybe we'll do another one when we'll get into the nitty gritty.
That'd be great.
Or we'll have the school committee in.
Right, yeah. That's great.
I'll have the superintendent in again. All right, well, Jim Adams, Superintendent of Schools from Ashland, thank you.
My pleasure.
Julie Kinney, thanks so much
Thank
for setting this
you.
up. And for NCTV, I'm Jill Lawrence. Thank you for watching.